Our session today focuses on the Palestinian geopolitical status under the Israeli occupation. And I would like to mention that this is live so that the speakers and the audience participating will be understanding that and to speak to the microphone so that others will hear you elsewhere. I would like to begin with a poem I wrote, otherwise the conference will not count. People will... People usually expect. This is from my third book, which is In Search of a Publisher, my third poetry book. A couple of years ago, my family and I spent a wonderful evening with the Vice President and the faculty from Bethlehem University. And we were coming back to Jerusalem, and we went through the checkpoint. And it was rather late, about 10:30. It's late there versus here. And the poem is referred to as Rachel's Maze. As you know, next to the Bethlehem checkpoint, there is Rachel's tomb. And so I call this Rachel's Maze. And it goes like this. We arrived late as fast-moving clouds obscured the summer moon and the military checkpoint site. Our Bethlehem evening of joy and peace soon led to a tense walk past iron fences and omnipresent eyes and ears, instilling discomfort, humiliation, and fright. Shoes, shoes, no metal, no shoes. An Orwellian voice, faceless, nameless, filled the empty space, not the mind and heart. With documents in hand, we hurried through more voices of stern commands and endless red lights. The moon appeared from behind the dark clouds, illuminating sad faces in the cold Jerusalem night. Another poem, and a short one as well, and then we start the panel, is referred to as the Serpentine Wall. She sits on a bamboo armchair, cushioned but hard, praying for a deal in the shade of the Serpentine Wall. Her prayers, like peace, are chased away by snipers at watchtowers and military officers at checkpoints. With no customers in sight, layers of dust on bamboo have dried up, but so is the love in people's hearts. What remains are skeletons of fear and taxi drivers in yellow cabs hounding tourists, only to find slim shadows in the hot sun. When will the serpent be returned to its cage? When will the wall be brought down? When will dignity return to those who care? With these two poems, I would like to introduce our panel, focusing on Palestinian geopolitical status under the Israeli occupation. As we know, Jewish settlements and the Israeli wall on Palestinian territories, including Jerusalem, have complicated Palestinian life and have been serious impediments to peace between Palestinians and Israelis. This session will focus on their impact on Palestinian daily life and the larger issue of peace. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you two wonderful individuals, Ambassador Warren Clark and Dr. Jad Ishaq. And I'll introduce first to us Ambassador Warren Clark, who will go first, followed by Dr. Jad Ishaq. Ambassador Clark became Executive Director of Churches for Middle East and Peace in January 2008. He was a career U.S. Foreign Service officer in the Department of State, serving in the Middle East, Europe, Canada, Africa, and the United Nations. He was in charge, he was chargé d'affaires in Nigeria, in Gabon, and Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Africa in Washington. He worked on Middle Eastern oil price negotiations, was desk officer for Libya, represented the US on the UN Security Council for Middle Eastern and African issues. He led a study group on the Middle East at the Institute of Politics of the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University. He also worked on microeconomic issues and finance as the US Treasury Department representative in Ottawa, coordinated economic forecasting for the US at the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, represented the US on the UN Economic and Social Council. He helped create a Peace Corps program in São Tomé and Príncipe. He ran a program to help governments in Central and Eastern Europe with privatization and liberalization. And in 2005, he earned a master's degree in theological studies from the Virginia Theological Seminary. He worked on international programs at the Washington National Cathedral. He chaired the Commission on Peace for the Episcopal Diocese of Washington, and also served as a chaplain at Sibley Hospital. And he has so many awards and graduate degrees from Harvard, Georgetown, Johns Hopkins University. He received also awards from the US Department of State, the US Navy, the Budapest Technical University, and the Gabonese Republic. He speaks French fluently and Eastern Arabic, and it is a pleasure for us to have you with us today.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm going to have to shorten that. That goes on far too long. I'm really delighted to be here today. Sir Rata Rabi is a friend, and I'm always delighted to come to these conferences. And I sponsored one of the children that are in the school in Bethlehem in Beit Segur, and I always try to see her every time I go to Bethlehem. So I have very warm feelings about HCEF and the wonderful work that it's doing. I thought I'd tell you briefly about what Churches for Middle East Peace does, because perhaps it's not entirely obvious from its title. And then I'll try to bring you up to date on where our political actions are right now and where we think they're going. Churches for Middle East Peace is not a church. It is a political, education, and advocacy organization. We are kind of like lobbyists, except lobbyists don't get tax deductions, and contributions to CMEP are tax deductible. So we call ourselves an advocacy group, not a lobby group. But we're a 501c3, and all support is gratefully received. What we do is we meet as often as we can and periodically with members of Congress and members of the administration and the White House and the State Department to advocate, to talk to them about the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians and what the US government can do or should be doing, or what we want them to do in order to help resolve this conflict. When I took the job almost 5 years ago, my friend said, "Warren, that looks like you have good job security. You're not going to solve the problem anytime soon." And when a friend of mine, Aaron David Miller, wrote a book called The Much Too Promised Land. And he wrote a dedication to Warren, who knows how difficult it is to get an agreement. I didn't know how difficult it was. It's much more difficult than I had any idea. And yet I am still hopeful. I'm still very hopeful that there can be and will be progress, I think, because there really has to be progress. I think no American government, no American president can afford to ignore this conflict because of its enormous political ramifications, not to mention the enormous human suffering that it's causing. And I think no matter who had won the last election, the US president would be very much involved. I think this president, we know, cares about the issue. He knows about the issue. He visited East Jerusalem when he was a United States Senator. He made working on the conflict a priority from the beginning of his first administration. And he was not successful. He made a number of proposals. He made quite a bit of effort in the first year or two of his administration, which mostly came to naught, although I think one can argue that the ball has been moved forward a little bit down the table. So we are hopeful that he will, again, in the first year of his second administration, take up the cudgel again to try to see whether some progress can be made. I think most of you know the difficulties that he ran into. He decided first to focus on the whole issue of settlements, causing for a freeze in settlements. He put a lot of pressure on the government of Israel, which finally agreed on Prime Minister Netanyahu, who for the first time ever agreed to the principle of the two-state solution. This is a speech he made in June of 2009. In the past, the Prime Minister Netanyahu had opposed the Oslo Accord. He opposed the Land for Peace agreement. And under enormous pressure, he, with a lot of qualifications, agreed to the principle. We then put a lot of pressure on about settlements. That was effectively avoided, and we really got no place. I think the last proposal that the President made, which was in May of last year, it called for negotiations based on the 1967 lines with mutually agreed adjustments and secure Israeli and Palestinian sovereignty over the Jordan Valley. This was almost immediately rejected publicly by the Prime Minister of Israel, and almost dropped completely while the administration got ready for the elections. And in the past 18 months, there's been basically no movement on the part of the U.S. government about the conflict. Now, 4 years ago, when Obama was elected, we sent a letter to the president-elect, urging him to make a resolution of the conflict a priority from the beginning of his administration. He did that. It was a very easy letter to write, simply make it a priority. Now here we are 4 years later, and we're going to write him again. When I say we, I mean the presiding bishops and the heads of the denomination on my board. I have 24 national church groups on my board, represented Catholic, Orthodox, mainstream Protestants, peace churches. We draft letters to the president. We get them approved by everybody. And then we try to get endorsements from as many people as we can to show that there's very broad support for this politically in the United States for people who vote. We have an email list of 15,000 addresses, people who receive our bulletins weekly, our newsletters, and to whom we will send action alerts. And we'll urge them to write their congressman, write their senator, write to the president when issues come up, and urge them to do the right thing. And they do. We have a very good open rate. This is the number of the people who actually open and read your emails. And we have a very good response rate. People actually will click through on the internet and send the message. We're living in a golden age of advocacy when one person or one senator can communicate with thousands or tens of thousands or even millions of people almost instantaneously. And we try to exploit that as best we can. There are a number of really current issues I'll just mention briefly. One is the financial crisis of the Palestinian Authority. As I think you probably know, about 1/3 of the budget of the Palestinian Authority comes from international donors. And those donations have been running slow and behind. There are other budget problems that the PA has. But the United States has actually appropriated $495 million this year for support for the Palestinian Authority, for security, and for USAID projects in the West Bank. None of that money has been dispersed. And that's because congressional committees are putting a hold and saying, no, you can't disperse the money until we say it's okay. Why are they putting a hold on it? Well, you can sort of connect the dots. There's a lot of concern about the application to the UN General Assembly for recognition of the Palestinian Authority as a non-member state. This would be, in effect, recognition by the General Assembly that Palestine is a state, not simply some kind of observer. This would give the Palestinian Authority legal standing in the UN system, in institutions like the International Court of Justice, and other UN bodies, which some people would find very disturbing and very threatening. And so there's been a very strong effort to discourage the PA from going ahead with this application. I don't think they are going to be discouraged. I think they're going to go ahead because they feel they have very little choice but to go ahead with that application. But it's creating enormous political tensions. What my group does as an advocacy group is to go and talk to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, to the UN House Foreign Affairs Committee, to the House Appropriations Committee, and say, see here, you are holding up this $495 million, which is creating enormous hardship. It is not in U.S. interest or Israel's interest or anybody's interest to have a failed state or to have a bankrupt state or to have a government that cannot meet its payroll living right next door to Israel. And in fact, the Israeli government has in the past encouraged the U.S. Congress to release funds to the Palestinian Authority. In addition, the Palestinian Authority it not only pays salaries of its employees, it subsidizes a whole bunch of institutions, including hospitals. Now, one of those hospitals is run by the Evangelical Lutheran Church of the United States, or actually it's the Lutheran World Federation, Augusta Victoria Hospital. It's a wonderful big hospital. It's a cancer hospital. It takes cancer patients from all over the West Bank and Gaza and gives them treatment that they can't get any other place. Augusta Victoria has an enormous debt because the fees that they usually collected from the Palestinian Authority, it has not been able to collect because the Palestinian Authority doesn't have the funds. They're broke. So it's a rather long connection connecting the dots. But the withholding of U.S. funds to the Palestinian Authority is affecting hospitals in East Jerusalem and their ability to help people who are acutely ill. Now, most members of Congress don't know that. Most American citizens don't know that. That's our job. Our job is to make it known to them and to urge them to do the right thing. Well, that's briefly what we do, the kind of things we do, and how we do it. Let me stop there and pass on to the next speaker.
Thank you, Ambassador Clark. It gives me great pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Jad Ishaq. Dr. Jad was born in Bet Sahur on the West Bank. He traces his lineage to 1563. Yes. He is married and has 4 children. And he graduated with honors in food science from Cairo University, taught chemistry at secondary schools in Bethlehem. He has an MS degree in food science from Rutgers University, the State University of New Jersey. He has a PhD where he studied at the Food Research Institute at the University of East Anglia. And then he moved on, returned to Bethlehem, where he became professor and dean of science at Bethlehem University. And in 1985, he co-founded the Economic Development Group as a nonprofit finance institution to promote entrepreneurship and authentic development in Palestine. He initiated and was the editor-in-chief of Bethlehem University Journal from 80 to 87. In 1986, he was awarded the Abdul Hamid Shuman's Prize for Arab Biologist of the Year. And also in 87, the first Intifada broke out in December of 87, and Dr. Ishaq became a leader in the nonviolent civil resistance for which he was arrested. Following his release, he co-founded important institutions in Palestine, including the Orient House, the Palestinian Center for Rapprochement Between People, the Applied Research Development Group Jerusalem, which promotes technology and transfer in the Palestinian community. It gives me great pleasure to ask you to come forward and share your remarks and presentation. After we finish the panel, there are maps and other literature that Dr. Ishaq would like any of you to look at and take with you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I would like to start by saying that I felt a little bit unhappy during the past 2 days, where all the talk was talking about minorities and Christians, etc., etc. Let me be honest with you. I never felt that I'm a minority. I'm a Palestinian Christian, proud of being Christian, proud of being Palestinian. This institute of ours, we work in all communities, all the West Bank and Gaza, regardless of faith, religion, and gender. And that's how I like to perceive that we have one cause, which is the liberation of Palestine from occupation. And I chose 2 titles. I will experiment the second title for you, on you today, not the first one. I want to say that I want to speak about the geopolitical developments in the Israeli colonies of the West Bank and Gaza. We have been colonized for 46 years, and it seems it's going to be for some time. So let's start calling a spade a spade.
64 years, not 46, 64.
46. 64, if you talk about, yeah, okay. Good. Sorry, but at least I am following the main guideline that we are talking about, and you will see anyhow what I mean. The mistake of the Palestinian leadership is that we decided to replace justice for peace by putting, when the peace process started, that we want a state on the West Bank and Gaza, including Jerusalem. That's why I use the term 46. I think we should have insisted on something else, mainly the partition plan of 181, but this could come later during the discussion. Well, when we joined the Madrid conference in 1991, we were hopeful that finally a resolution would be found for the Israeli-Palestinian conflicts, which is the crux of the Middle East conflict. And the basis for the Madrid conference was stated from those who invited us. It said it would be based on implementation of United Nations Security Council 242-338, the principles of land for peace. 242, by the way, says very clearly the inadmissibility of acquisition of territory by war, and called for the withdrawal of Israeli armed forces from territories occupied in 1967. The territories, I don't care. It says inadmissibility of acquiring territory by force. Well, after 20 years, what did we get? Gaza will come later, but in the West Bank, we have now islands of areas A separated from area B, and all of them are swimming in area C. That's why I call this archipelago. Really, that's how we are. These cantus, Bantustans of areas A and B are not connected. Those who are controlling area C, which is 60%, areas A and B combined together is 40%, are controlling the West Bank. Not only that, but the significance of Area C is that 87% of the nature reserves are in Area C, 90% of the forests, 48% of the wells, 37% of the springs, and almost half of the roads. Without Area C, there is no viable Palestinian state. But what did Israel do? Israel installed 179 colonies, and 243 outposts. A total population of 650,000. Now, when you use this figure, you have to be careful because I'm including all the settlers, the colonists in East Jerusalem as well. The Israelis try to say, no, 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 this is an exaggerated figure. And if you dare write an op-ed or something in an article, they will tell you you are lying because the 300,000 settlers in East Jerusalem, according to Israel, they have been annexed to Jerusalem, so they don't count. So be careful. You don't want to be viciously attacked by those who will find ways to justify their action. But there are 650,000 settlers. They are now 16% of the total population of the West Bank. You have to consider this. Well, I want to share with you what happened in 2011, 2012. But 2012, until August, we bought high resolution satellites, 50 centimeter resolution, and we counted 8,935 units and 864 mobile homes were added in 161 settlements and outposts. If we extrapolate till the end of the year, that's 14,699 housing units will be added. So this will be the legacy of Netanyahu. In the past 2 years, 25,000 units were added. Multiply each unit by 4.2, and you can see that more than 100,000 settlers have been added to the West Bank, including East Jerusalem. That's how we do it. That's my job. By the way, following what is happening in the settlements is only a small portion of what we do in Tahrir. We do lots of more useful work on the ground in agriculture, environment, etc. But nobody wants to listen to that, so most of the people are interested in what we do in Settlements Watch. I find this absurd, but nevertheless. I want to show you an example of how we do it. This is an aerial photo of Har Gilo in Beit Jala in 2011, and that's the same settlement in 2012. And you can see the difference in the construction that took place over 1 year. And of course, you can calculate the number of meters added and number of people who will be included. Another one is an outpost. This is the outpost of Nehama in 2011, and look what happened in 2012. The outpost has become legalized, and the caravans or the mobile homes now became permanent buildings, constructed buildings, as you see to your right. So the outpost became now a settlement. Well, the slogan is that, how do you want to prevent settlement freeze? This is the Israeli narrative. You know, do you want our families here not to grow? Well, if they are normal human beings like the other Israelis, they grow at 1.7%. So I calculated how many houses do they need. And I found that all they need is 2,630 units. So why are they building 15,000 or 14,000? In 2010, they built 2.8 times more than what they need. In 2011, they built 4.4 more. And in 2012, 5.6 fold. So this is to tell you that the Israeli excuses for building of settlements and by the way, every time there is a big visitor from the United States coming to visit us, the Israelis receive him with orders, with plans, and frankly, the largest one was when Biden came to visit us. Hillary Clinton did not receive that same one. So please tell Obama not to come, at least for the time being, because if he will visit, most probably they will have a big settlement plan if he visits the area.
Well, this week they announced some in honor of the election.
1,300.
Yes.
Yes. That was their congratulations message to Obama.
Yes.
House demolition. About it continues unabated. The figures, I think it's altogether, I don't know the figures, but I had another slide, but it took them over. But about 1,000 houses were destroyed in 2011. In forced displacement, I want to just give you one example. In the Zanuta village, located in the southern Hebron Hills, the Israelis decided that this is an archaeological site and should be removed. All of a sudden, this, by the way, is the plan for the segregation wall, but now we believe they intend to restore the 2004 route of the wall, which means all this area will be taken out of commission, including Zanuta, because next to it, I will show you the next slide, next to it, is there are 8 Palestinian communities in the southern Hebron Hills that will have a similar fate. They are now being told that they should be disbanded and forced, moved somewhere else, because the landscape in that area is good for training for Israeli soldiers. So the Palestinians are unfortunate accidents to be there, and they have to go, and this area will link with the Zamuta that I mentioned. So the Israeli the Israeli policy is to try to grab as much Palestinian land as possible in the coming few months. Again, the same thing is happening in the area of the upper Jordan Valley, where these are the locations that will be targeted, and 2,300 Bedouins will be taken out from the Ma'ale Adumim block, and now they are finding a place for them to move them where, and the only place they found, by the way, is the dumping site, the solid waste dumping site in Abu Dis. So these people will be moved and placed to live on the top of the dumping site, which is, I don't know, you know, don't they know a little bit of Environment 101 and the risks of, you know, or these are not Homo sapiens sapiens? I don't know. Khirbet Yarza, 31 structures were ordered to be removed, but immediately afterwards, another 10 communities received the same order in the upper Jordan Valley. In Palestine, the Palestinian trees are also becoming victims. It seems that anything, you know, this year we lost about 9,000 olive trees. And you know, for a Palestinian, you know, who planted the tree, took care of it, you know, it's like taking a child from the family. But the Israelis, that's where. And if you look at which areas are they targeting, you will try to understand the Israeli strategy. If you look, these are the red areas where the confiscation, the destruction of trees, and you can see what they are planning to do is to make corridors linking the eastern segregation zone with the western segregation zone, but I will come to that in a minute. For example, here in Itamar and Itzar, these are the outposts, and these are the areas where they have decided to cut the trees. And you don't have to be a genius to see what the intention is. To build a corridor, a cluster of the settlements with lots of open space, lots of land, while the Palestinian communities will be strangulated by either the wall or by routes and by the settlements expansion. So it is a very well done policy. It's not haphazard. You have to realize this. Looting Palestinian land is doing the same. They are doing the same thing here. They issued 2 military orders in Qusra and Abwin in Nablus, and you can see the idea, what they intend to do. They want to link all the settlements with the outposts and confine the Palestinian communities to certain areas, and it will, in a matter of 10 years, 20 years, there will be no land left for the Palestinians. So there's no sustainability, and the only thing will be for people to start living. Another method was to try to merge settlements together, like Brukhin and Rikalim. They decided to merge them and take the land in between. Again, you know, in order to avoid any pressure coming on them to remove the settlements or dismantle them. Again, another example in Tapua and Rikalim. And in Jerusalem, what they are doing is they are filling the gaps. Linking the blue are the new tenders and plans versus the old tenders and plans. And you can see the ultimate goal. And I want you to look at the bottom part of that slide, and you can see what is Bethlehem facing. For the first time, what Bethlehem will see is that there will be a cluster of settlements which will separate from here all the way. They will separate Bethlehem from Jerusalem for the first time in history. A wall and the wall of settlements that goes parallel to it. Yet, I'm surprised that the Christian world and the Western world is silent about it. It's the first time in history. And all this land that you see here is Palestinian Christian, most of it is Christian land of people from Bethlehem, Beit Saur, and Beit Jala. They lost 25,000 dunums for Jerusalem. What the current size of the three Christian triangle, Beit Saur, and Bethlehem, and Beit Jala, is 15,000 dunums. So they lost 1.2x than what they have now. Yet the whole world is watching and silent about it. A similar thing is taking place in Jerusalem, where they closed Ras Al Khamis checkpoint here, and now they want everybody to operate the Shafat terminal, and they got some money to operate it like this. And now they are saying, we want to introduce high tech in this terminal. You can use your card in order to pass through. What does that mean? It means that every Palestinian Jerusalemite has to renew his ID card, and to prove that he has a residence and a place inside Jerusalem. Well, for those of you who don't know, Israel grants only about 120 permits for all the Jerusalemites. What they need is 2,000 every year. So many of them are building illegally, or they are living in Bethlehem. What does that mean? It means that 130,000 Jerusalemites will be denied their residency permits, and these are their locations. And as a result of that, Israel now is talking about Greater Jerusalem. They like the word gerrymandering. Yeah, I will finish. Gerrymandering, they will add all these, they will add 3 major settlement blocks: Ma'ale Adumim, Pisgat Ze'ev, Gush Atzion, and the percentage of Israelis added will be 175,000. In return, we will lose 130,000. And the percentage of Palestinians in Jerusalem will drop from 36% to 18%. This is, do you call this ethnic cleansing? What? You said yes, my sister says no. I believe you. Okay. Netanyahu came up with a report. Where I asked Judge Levy to put a report which says the Israeli settlements in the West Bank are legal under international law. The government should avoid demolishing illegal outposts, just the opposite, they should legitimize them. And Israel's rule over the West Bank does not constitute a belligerent occupation as it applies under the Fourth Geneva Convention. Surprise, surprise. This will be on the table. And immediately they started telling the civil administration, please take over the responsibility of the Palestinian localities in East Jerusalem. Which means, if you put them all together, and you look at the areas which they have identified as state land, Israel managed to identify to classify 40% of the West Bank as state land in order to prepare the corridors. Now, if you look at this map and the map of the corridors, you will see that they fit very well with each other. So now, the problem is that now we know the strategy. What can we do about it? I tried to sum up all the actions they have done in the master plans. You know, the Israelis now are doing an Israeli state in the West Bank, which consists of the settlements, master plans, outposts, closed military area, segregation wall, declared state land, bypass roads. This is it. And the rest would be the Palestinian Bantustans. Well, in Gaza, the largest prison on earth, 24% of Gaza is inaccessible since 2007. Anything that moves in this area, donkey, car, vehicle, a person, is shot immediately by a rocket. In the sea, the agreement stipulated that we will be able to use fishing up to 20 miles. Now it has been reduced to 3 miles. There is no fish in 3 miles. There is only, you know, pollution. I will not speak too much about the peace process because my attorney spoke about it. But I will say how I feel as a Palestinian, that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict has been relegated. Prime Minister Netanyahu made a presentation, if you recall, showing all this to the people, you know, the red and the green, and, you know, he was lecturing to the students in the General Assembly. Palestinian reconciliation is not happening. The quartet is ineffective. And I just say, I quoted the 3 things which they have already declared. Government of Israel immediately dismantled settlement outposts erected since March 2001. Not one single one was established, removed. Consistent with the Mitchell report, and this is, by the way, American wording, American administration wording for the quartet. Government of Israel freezes all settlement activity, including natural growth. Never. The IDF withdraws progressively from areas occupied since March 2001, and the 2 sides agreed to restore the status quo that existed prior to that. There are still about 738 different obstacles. Nothing happened. In the last speech to the UN last month, this is the only time where Netanyahu spoke about the Palestinian issue. He said, President Abbas just spoke here. I say to him and say to you, we won't solve our problems with libelous speeches at the UN. That's not the way to solve it. We won't solve our conflict with unilateral declaration of statehood, but, you know, we can do it with unilateral actions of settlements, confiscation of land, you know. This is, I consider it political prostitution, but anyhow. We have to sit together, negotiate together, and reach a mutual compromise. But my God, we have been negotiating for 20 years, in which the demilitarized Palestinian state recognizes the one and only Jewish state. That's not a recognition of 2-state solution. The 2-state solution does not say a Jewish state. What about the 1.5 million Palestinian Arabs? So I went back to my notebooks and I looked at his speech here in this country in May 2011. He said, 2 years ago, I publicly committed to a solution of 2 states for 2 people. a Palestinian state alongside the Jewish state. This is not easy for me. I recognize that in a genuine peace, we will be required to give up parts of the ancestral Jewish homeland. In Judea and Samaria, the Jewish people are not foreign occupiers. So who is saying that he recognized the two states? He didn't. He didn't accept 67 borders. He didn't accept that Jerusalem will be resolved. And he said that he wants to keep the Jordan River. Yet these fiery non-speech, non-peace words were received with 29 standing ovations from the Congress. I don't think he would have done it in the Knesset. He will not have received 29 standing ovations. That's what I feel, that our enemy, perhaps we should look at different things. Perhaps Netanyahu knows what's happening and knows that there is an infertile Congress that is supported by the Jewish lobby. The PNA is facing a severe financial crisis. Yes. We were told that $490 million coming to us. Yes, okay. Let me tell you, if Israel will just pay for the looted stone, gravel, and water, we will be receiving $1 billion a year. The gravel alone is $540 million. So we don't want American money. Just let them pay for the looted water. Here is all the things that we've done. Israel knows that between now and January, where the elections will take place, the international community will be paralyzed. Creating facts on the ground is the name of the game. Most of Area C will be under Israeli control, so there will be nothing to negotiate. And without Area C, I don't think there is anything. Israel is replacing the two-state solution with a two-state situation. But this is the story of Israeli leadership since 1967. They never wanted to go back, whether it's from alone 76 until the settlers' plan of 2012. They never said they will give us the 67 borders. And finally, I want to tell you that the Netanyahu-Lieberman coalition is an ammunition strategy to face any potential pressure that might come from Obama in his second term. And they all the time, they will play the PR game, like, one day after Obama won, he invited Abu Mazen, let's come and negotiate under no conditions. But the freezing of settlements is not a condition. It's an obligation. It's not a condition. The international community has the responsibility of demanding that Israel complies with international law. Ending the Israeli colonization of the Gaza and the West Bank should become a world priority. In the Cairo speech, it was an American national priority. I didn't dare say it. I would love to see this to become a national American policy. I know that solving the Palestinian problem may not bring peace to the Middle East, but be assured, there will be no peace in the Middle East if the Palestinian problem is not resolved. Our bid for observer status should not be undermined. And finally, let's look for the day after we get accepted into the UN. And thank you very much.
We have 10 minutes for Q&A session. If you can identify yourself, ask a question so we'll get as many of the questions as we can.
David Osmondson. It was speculated on television yesterday that the re-election of President Obama will likely cost Netanyahu his job. Do you see that as being a blessing as much as I do? And also, I heard that the Obama administration intends to decrease its footprint with Israel. And wouldn't that also adversely affect Netanyahu's hawkish attitudes?
Let's keep our answers short so we can
Let's ask another question and then we'll answer.
With all the facts stated, with the facts on the ground, the settlement and the number of settlers, is the two-state solution still really a valid solution?
Is it two-state what?
Is it still available? But that's the title of the presentation.
Like, is it still valid, or are we looking at a one-state solution?
No, let's take a couple of more questions.
No, let's go.
Let me start with Netanyahu.
Yeah, because we will forget them then.
Let me start with a question about Prime Minister Netanyahu. As I mentioned, in the 1996 election, he ran against Oslo. He ran against the agreement to negotiate for the Palestinians. He's the leader of the Likud party. The Likud party platform says there will never be an Arab state between the sea and the river. They absolutely oppose the creation of a Palestinian state. Now, he did agree to, in 2009, to the principle of the two-state solution, but his attachment to that has been questioned by many writers, including the editorial writers of the New York Times. I know a guy who has known Prime Minister Netanyahu for decades. He says to me that Bibi, as he's called, will never agree to the creation of an Arab state between the Mediterranean and the Jordan River. That it's not in his DNA. He will oppose it in every way he can. So whether or not the Prime Minister stays on or not it's impossible to tell. Most people, I think, would say, however, that he is likely to stay. That is, the spectrum of Israeli politics being what it is, since the disastrous Second Intifada 10 years ago, the opinion has shifted away from the left and the center towards the right, and it is now much easier to form a political coalition government of the right-wing parties, Likud and the religious parties and Israel Beitna party, than it is from the center or the left. So it's not at all clear, I think, that Netanyahu will not prevail. However, the re-election of Obama has changed the constellation, and I think it has encouraged the opposition, particularly Tzipi Livni and Ehud Barak, to think about trying to form a coalition of the center and the left after the elections. And there was even a report that they're trying to encourage Shimon Peres, the president, which is a figurehead position, to run for prime minister. He's in his late 80s. I don't think he'll do that. But there certainly is opinion in Israel that still is supportive of a real two-state solution and creating a viable Palestinian state.
Is it working? Okay. There is one international community term of reference. You can't have. The mic has been turned off. Turned off. Okay. Israel cannot be an outlaw state. Imagine or remember what happened when Iraq invaded Kuwait, right? The whole world went against Iraq, and he didn't start building settlements in Kuwait. We cannot accept, and we cannot violate the international community by accepting conquering land by war and bringing settlers into our land. So the two-state solution, under what I described, is not acceptable at all. And the United States made a fatal mistake. George W. Bush in 2004 replied to a letter sent to him by Sharon, in which he said that we have to take facts on the ground. And unfortunately, Bush returned the letter with a letter which said it's unrealistic to expect that the final outcome of negotiations will be the 1967 border. Anyhow, Clinton, in Camp David in 2000, issued his parameters in which he said, I see the solution within the 92 to 96% meaning that the Palestinians will get 92 to 96, and there will be a, equivalent swap of land. 92 to 96 means, let's say the 6%. We submitted to the quarter, the Palestinians submitted to the quarter a map, because the quarter demanded that the Palestinians will submit a map showing, and the Israelis, a map regarding how do we see the final status solution. And we submitted a map which talked about 2%. The Israelis never submitted a plan, and they sent a letter of 22 discussion points, and they said, we don't recognize the 67 border, it's not a border, and we don't know where it is. So, from what you see here, I think we as Palestinians stopped believing in any statements by any politician, including the American president. What Obama said in Cairo is something, and what happened later is something else. And this time, in Arabic they say you cannot be stung from the same hole twice. لا يخدع المؤمن من جحر مرتين. We will not trust anybody who will tell us, okay, I want an Israeli leader who will have the guts to remove 10,000 settlers. The 8,000 settlers, when they removed from Gaza, became something too big in the whole world. And they said, never again. Well, what about 700,000 settlers? Removing 700, where is the Israeli leader who will comply with international legitimacy and listen, especially that if they have the full support of the American administration? So there must be a new approach, not sending Dennis Ross again. Dennis Ross failed us. He failed for 22 years. Why should we now say that sending Dennis Ross again will find a solution? But to comfort you, Hananiya, let me tell you, there are now more Palestinians in Mandate Palestine than Jews. There are 6.1 Palestinians, 5.9 Jews. So if Israel wants to become an apartheid state, and they are, so we'll have now to fight for our political and civil rights. If they don't want to go by the book, we know what to do, which means calling a spade a spade. This is an apartheid state, and they have to suffer the consequences.
Okay, we'll have two more questions, and then we'll answer them, and we will go to lunch. Yes, please.
Okay, I have a question for Dr. Clark as well as Dr. Isaac. It seems that the Republican Party have pretty much defined the American Christian point of view on the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. And part of the reason for that is because the evangelical Christian Zionists have become very powerful and effective within the Republican Party. So from a political strategic point of view, it seems that for those of us who are interested in gaining power in the United States, in Congress, it doesn't seem to be enough that we knock on the doors of congressmen. It seems that from a strategic point of view that we ought to get involved within the political parties at the very local level, even at the local precinct level. So my question to you, sir, is your organization getting involved within the structure of these political parties, not only the Republican Party, but also the Democratic Party? And for Dr. Isaac, you mentioned that there is a large Arab population in Palestine and in Israel, and there are, I think, 20 to 25% are Israeli Arabs. Where is their political clout? It seems to me that 20% should have some type of influence on the, Israeli political scene. If you could just kindly, elaborate on that, I would appreciate that.
Go ahead, please.
Yes. This time, my question is extremely brief and non-controversial. I'd simply like for us to be told whether Dr. Isaac's wonderful, excellent PowerPoint is available on DVD for groups here in the United States to show.
It's there.
You can mention the material there. So you can
This is the abbreviated. You know, there are 3 presentations. I prepared this one 6 o'clock in the morning. I called it very short HCEF. The one that you have there, it's the expanded version. And they are available, and you can download it from our site, www.arij.org. And you can use it freely. There is no intellectual property right. I got this from God, and it will be used for good purposes. Go ahead. Use it for any purpose you want.
The website one more time, please.
www.arij.org. The economic cost of occupation is there. This presentation is there. And this will be the presentation that we are going to present it as Palestinian delegation to the World Social Forum on the 26th of November in Porto Alegre, Brazil. And regarding your question about the 1948 Arabs, this is a very good question. The good advantage that we expect, and this is, I'm not just stipulating, we have now only 10 Knesset members who are from the Israeli Arabs, while their percentage should be 20%, 20. The reason is that many Arabs vote for secular Israeli parties. But their contribution to the GMP is what we, and this is coming to the whole essence of the conference. Those 1.5 million Palestinians, they have a GNP, an average of $15,000 per capita, compared to the Palestinians in the West Bank, where we have 15. So they are 10 times more. They are entrepreneurs, they are very skilled, they have all the technology, and unfortunately, they are the forgotten faithful. When we accepted the 67 border, we throw them under the truck. And therefore, we need, I said, the new approach. The new approach is this, and let me be very blunt about it. The Palestinian refugees in Lebanon will never be nationalized in Lebanon because it will topple the Sunni Shiite percentage, Druze. Nobody wants them there. The Palestinians in Syria are falling victims because if they take the sides of the opposition or that, so they are being assassinated while they are inside their camps. And Jordan will not be able to absorb them because it will change the demographic balance in Jordan. So there is no way. And these people, you know, they are victims of the conflict. So my proposition is very simple. We need a different term of reference. Netanyahu wants a Jewish state. I will accept a Jewish state. And I think I represent most Palestinians. I accept that Netanyahu will have his Jewish state on the partition plan of 181. Meaning, we divide the land between the two based on demography. We are now 6.1 and they are 5.9, so divided 61% Palestinian, 59% Jews. And in that case, we'll bring the Palestinians in Lebanon to that part. If you recall the partition plan, our borders of Palestine will stretch all the way towards Lebanon, Syria, Egypt. And those refugees will come to this territory. So it's not the Israeli narrative that any return of refugees will mean the destruction of Israel. They will come to areas which Israel will relinquish to the Palestinians to solve the Palestinian refugee problem. When will we have a world leader who will finally say, Israelis do not want to integrate in the Middle East, they want to have their own state, the Jewish state, let them have it, but based on 181. I think this is justice. This is what the churches should fight for, because it will provide an element which has been totally ignored, and the issue of power struggle, power relations was the dominant one. Perhaps miracles do happen. We are in the Holy Land.
Maybe I can comment briefly on that. From my perspective, politics has been called the art of the possible. And one can come up with all kinds of different ideas for administering justice, which may be just, but one has to consider what's feasible and what's possible. Talking to Jewish groups in the United States, as I do, they are, most of them, very attached to the two-state solution. And you ask them, is the two-state solution feasible? And they get very nervous very quickly. Because from their perspective, almost any alternative to the two-state solution is very threatening. A single state, a single democratic state, would be a Palestinian majority state. A binational state like Belgium, most people would throw up their hands and say it's not feasible. A Spartite state, the way we have with sort of a Spartan military regime running little enclaves, is distasteful to most American Jewish groups. So they are left, lack of anything else, with the two-state solution. And of course, the policies of the government of Israel are going gangbusters against that objective by strengthening the settlements. So it's a complete conundrum, and it's impossible. I think to address briefly your first question, we try to affect public opinion through grassroots. And that means talking not so much within political parties, but talking to people in political parties. We have, with our thousands of supporters around the country, organized by congressional district, and they will call on the district offices of members of Congress or their staff, sometimes with like-minded Jewish and Muslim colleagues, to urge those members of Congress to do the right thing. But let me again tell you something about the scale involved here. My budget is $300,000 a year, okay? AIPAC's budget, last time I checked, was $67 million a year. Now that's only for advocacy on AIPAC's part. That's not money that they give to politicians to run for election. That's just for public affairs. So they have monitors in every congressional district watching every word every congressman says every day as it might apply to Israel. And they let him know very quickly whether he's off or on base. Now, there are 435 members of Congress. 335 of those have almost no Jewish constituents, no Arab constituents, don't know much, don't care much about this conflict. But if they're getting $5,000 or $10,000 a year in political contributions, and if they're getting somebody who's calling them up on the telephone, or a bunch of rabbis or other people who are coming to see them anytime they say anything that AIPAC doesn't like, they are going to pay attention and they're going to be swayed. And that's why tomorrow you could get 335 members of Congress to sign any letter at all, saying anything at all about the conflict. Let me mention one last thing, because the subject of refugees has come up. There are 4 final status issues. One of them is refugees, one of them is Jerusalem. The border issue and the security issue have been talked to death. People don't talk about refugees and Jerusalem much because they're thought to be too sensitive. But in many ways, they're the same issue.
Yes.
And indeed, the people who talk about, and Clinton and other people who talk about a solution, they don't talk about it much anymore, but when they talked about a solution, there was an implicit trade-off. The implicit trade-off was maybe a few great-grandmothers who remember their orange groves in Haifa before 1948 would be allowed to return, but it would be only a symbolic and small number of people. Other Palestinian refugees, if they wish, could return to a Palestinian state. Others would receive compensation. And there's a Palestinian public opinion guy, Khalil Shikaki. He did a survey. It was very controversial at Palestinian camps. Most Palestinian refugees in the diaspora would accept compensation. And there, in fact, was a deal on refugees in 1999, which was never consummated. But the deal was the peace treaty that never took place between Israel and Syria in 1999. And the deal was there would be compensation of $6 billion for Palestinian refugees in Syria who chose voluntarily to give up their right of return. Now, if you give up the right of return, that will be linked with Jerusalem. That has to be, a viable Palestinian state is only going to work if East Jerusalem is the capital. And so the implicit trade-off is, okay, we give up painfully one thing, you give up painfully something else.
Thank you both very, very much. And thank you, audience, for doing this. Let me before we go to lunch, I want to read two short poems. I will tell you I'm not a poet by training. I have a PhD in political science, and I've always tried to humanize politics and not politicize humanity. So what was done here is a tremendous contribution. We need to think about those issues. And I would like to read the poetry because it relates to exactly what we were talking about. This poem is called More Times Than I Can Remember. I, living between the Jordan and the Med, was drawn and redrawn more times than I can remember. Names of cities and towns, lakes and streams, mountains and valleys vanished off my body countless times, only to reappear, clothed in religious garb one day, nationalist garb the next. Lines, some shallow, others deep, decorate their colors and shapes the ins and outs of my being, looking increasingly like Swiss cheese. The winds of conflict blow through me like a hurricane, twisting and shredding my limbs. I long for the day when I'm whole again. And the next one is called Transformation. To a relentless fire I awoke to touch only wet ashes, heaven's tears cleansing souls in fear and awe ascending Jacob's ladder. Toward liberty's cross I rushed to freeze hammers, nails, piercing flesh, blood-stopping mouths of dry skulls, crying out for justice and peace. With angelic joy I soared with prophets, leading away from stumbling dark pits and satanic wheels toward the New Jerusalem. When will you learn to seek shelter in the shadow of God's wings? Thank you very much.